Hi everybody. I thought I'd like to take a few moments to share with you some of my thoughts concerning the COVID-19 situation. Before I do, I want you to know that I, along with the staff of the church, are praying very much for you, for your safety, for your health and for your protection. We really have nothing to fear because God is in control of the whole situation. Even though we may feel sometimes that there's so much terrible news that's coming in from everywhere and there's, you might become fearful. On the practical side, we in the church are doing everything that we can possibly to ensure that safety procedures are put in place. Our services are being streamed on the weekends, so some of you who may feel uncomfortable with gathering in big groups, you can follow our services from church. Now, with that said, I do have some things that I would like to share with you, some thoughts in my mind, and without much ado, let's get into that. Let me bring you back to another time, to the year 252 AD. It was a really difficult time for Christianity. In Tertullian's time and after, Christianity spread with remarkable rapidity in North Africa and Numidia. But in the generation after his death, it underwent severe testing, when the emperors Decius and Valerian unleashed the first universal persecutions of the churches. At that time, the bishop of Carthage was Cyprian. So Carthage was the ancient Phoenician city located in the north coast of Africa. During this time, it had become the most powerful city in the region because of trade. Now, in this crowded city, Cyprian had been made bishop just a couple of years before, and he had to endure tremendous and maybe some of the most severe persecutions up until that time. So this guy here is Cyprian. In 252 AD, they had just gained some respite from the persecutions because of the war with the Gothics, and during that war, Emperor Decius had died. So everyone was just getting a break from the persecutions, and just when this was happening, the city was hit with a plague, a highly contagious disease that swept across the entire Roman Empire and which may have contributed to the fall. This proved to be a terrible time for everyone, including Christians in Carthage. Eusebius, this guy, the church historian, wrote concerning this event in his famous work, Ecclesiastical History. He writes, "But now, after we and they had obtained a very brief respite, this pestilence has overtaken us, which is to them a more fearful thing than all former fears, and more terrible than any calamity whatever." And to quote an expression of an historian of their own, "a thing alone which has exceeded all men's expectations." While to us it was not so much that as a discipline and a testing, no less severe than any of the rest. For it did not spare us, though it attacked the Gentiles with great force. So this disease was more fearful, Eusebius says, than even the severe persecutions that had preceded it. Cyprian described the symptoms this way. He says, "This trial, that now the bowels relax into a constant flux," in other words, diarrhea, "discharged the bodily strength, fire originated in the marrow, ferments into wounds of the forces, that the intestines were shaken with continual vomiting, that the eyes are on fire with the injected blood, that in some cases the feet or some parts of the limbs are taken off by the contagion of disease putrefaction, that from the weaknesses arising from the maiming and the loss of the body, either the gait is enfeebled, or the hearing is obstructed, or the sight is darkened." It was a terrible disease and with awful symptoms. Now keep in mind, this was a time when they had no clean water, no modern medical care, no isolation ward, definitely no N95 mask, and for sure, no rolls of toilet paper. So Cyprian, in writing to the church during this time, he wrote a treatise called On the Mortality. And I'd like to read to you, some of his words to the church, which I think maybe can teach us a thing or two. "But nevertheless, it disturbs some that the power of this disease attacks our people equally with the heathens, as if the Christians believed for this purpose that he might have the enjoyment of the world and this life free from the contact of ills, and not as one who undergoes all adverse things here and is reserved for future joy. It disturbs some that this mortality is common to us with others. And yet, what is there in this world which is not common to us with others? So long as this flesh of ours still remains, according to the law of our first birth, common to us with them. Now, what Cyprian is talking about is that there were some Christians who were, not happy that, Christians were not immune from disease, right? They thought that, well, I'm a Christian, I should be immune from this disease. But Cyprian addresses them and says the illness fell on Christians and non-Christians alike, and this shouldn't bother us. Now, this experience of the flesh, as it were, is common to all. Now, the second thing he writes is this: righteous men have ever possessed this endurance. The apostles maintain this discipline from the law of the Lord, not to murmur in adversity, but to accept bravely and patiently whatever things happen in the world. We must not murmur in adversity, beloved brethren, but we must bear with patience and courage whatever happens, since it is written, the sacrifice to God is a broken spirit, a contrite and humble heart God does not despise. So Cyprian saw the experience as a test of faith and thought that good Christians should not be given to complaining when facing such adversity, but be courageous. And then he continues, he says, let not these things be offenses to you, but battles, nor let them weaken nor break the Christian's faith, but rather show forth his strength in the struggle, since all injury inflicted by present troubles is to be despised in the assurance of future blessings. Unless the battle has preceded, there cannot be a victory. When there shall have been in the onset of battle the victory, then also the crown is given to the victors. For the helmsman is recognized in the tempest. In warfare, the soldier is proved. Struggle in adversity is the trial of truth. Wow, those were some amazing words. So Cyprian is saying the captain, the helmsman, is tested in the storm. Right? That's when you know whether the captain is good or not. And the soldier is tested in warfare. Struggle in adversity is the trial of truth. Great words. So Cyprian could feel this way because he literally felt that as Christians, we have nothing to fear from death. If we die, we're going to be with the Lord. We're going to glory. So he writes, he says, this mortality, as it is a plague to Jews and Gentiles and enemies of Christ, so it is a departure to salvation to God's servants. Right? So if you're not a Christian, you have a lot to worry about. But if you are a Christian, you have nothing to fear from any disease, any death. The good bishop reminds us, we should ever and always reflect that we have renounced the world and are in the meantime living here as guests and strangers. This is not our home. He says, let us greet the day which assigns to each one of us to his home, which snatches us hence and sets us free from the snares of the world and restores us to paradise and the kingdom. It is an important reminder, isn't it, that this really is not our home. And it's at times like this that God, has a way of putting this, putting his finger on the issue and reminding us where our loyalties lie. So, what did the church do during this time of great fear and testing and disease? Well, another bishop, Dionysius of Alexandria, he wrote this. Okay, this is Dionysius here. He wrote, after these events, a pestilential disease followed the war. Now indeed, everything is tears, and everyone is mourning, and wailings resound daily through the city because of the multitude of the dead and dying. Let's not forget, it was a terrible situation. Carthage was a crowded city. Lots of people were packed together. There was no hygiene, no sanitation, and people were dying everywhere. There were dead people lying on the streets, and everyone was looking out for themselves. Dionysius describes what was going on with the non-believers. He said this: they deserted those who began to be sick and fled from their dearest friends, and they cast them out into the streets when they were half dead and left the dead like refuse unburied. They shunned any participation or fellowship with death, which yet with all their precautions, it was not easy for them to escape. This is like a picture of Wuhan, isn't it? Some of these people, they were kicking out their own family members if they were sick, right, in the street because they didn't want to die. And people were just out there lying, the dead bodies were in the street because nobody wanted to risk their own lives to clear up all these things. No one, that is, except for the Christians. So Dionysius, he writes this about what the church did during this time. And I think this is really challenging to us. He says, the most of our brethren, the Christians, were unsparing in their exceeding love and brotherly kindness. They held fast to each other and visited the sick fearlessly and ministered to them continually, serving them in Christ. And they died with them most joyfully, taking the affliction of others, drawing the sickness from their neighbors to themselves, willingly receiving their pains. And many who cared for the sick and gave strength to the others died themselves, having transferred to themselves their death. And the popular saying, which always seems to be mere expression of courtesy, they then made real in action, taking their departure as the others offscouring. Truly, the best of our brethren departed from life in this manner, including some presbyters and deacons, and those of the people who had the highest reputation, so that this form of death, through the great piety and strong faith was exhibited, seemed to lack nothing of martyrdom. And they took the bodies of the saints in their open hands and in their bosoms, and closed their eyes and their mouths. They bore them away on their shoulders and laid them out. They clung to them and embraced them, and they prepared them suitably with washings and garments, and after a little they received like treatment themselves. For the survivors were continually following those who had gone before them. Wow. Here we are thinking about how we can keep ourselves safe, how to prolong our life, extend our health. But Dionysius is saying that the Christians of those days, they went out to help the sick, knowing full well in so doing that they themselves would die. And they did die. That's stunning. Their love was, in the words of Dionysius, made real in action. Dr. Li Weiliang, who was a Christian in China who died recently, he would be numbered among these heroes. So, what about us? While everyone is understandably concerned for self-preservation, I'm challenged to think about how we can be in this time a faithful witness to God's love in a time of adversity and opportunity. The testimonies of Cyprian and Dionysius explain why the church, instead of being reduced by persecution and sickness during this period, experienced phenomenal growth. It was one of the times when the church grew the most. And perhaps we too may find, by fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, and on the will of God, courage to rise up and not shrink back in fear at such a time as this. I'll leave you with these words from the verse Revelation chapter 12 and verse 11. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death.